All right. So, you guys got to all pay attention. Here we go. Chapter 18, Spy Camp. Now, some of you may remember, the last thing we read about is they were trying to get the jump on Spider to make sure that Spider doesn't have the advantage against them. Because Spider kind of has an idea, and we think that Spider has infiltrated or got involved with the CIA. That's how they know where everyone is lately. Chapter 18, Simulation. Winchester, Virginia, June 15th, 1500 hours. 1500 hours is what time? Anyone remember?
3 o'clock?
3 p.m., yes. It took us another hour to walk to Cyrus Hale's getaway car, which was parked on an old logging road up in the forest. It took another few hours after that to drive to Winchester, as Cyrus took a very roundabout route. Spider will be watching the main highways, he explained. We grabbed lunch at Burger King drive-thru on the way and arrived in Winchester. No, I don't. Unless you guys.
We read part of it yesterday.
I started it yesterday, but
then
we only
nobody
got
was
to
paying
like the first
attention.
page.
All right. We grabbed lunch at a Burger King drive-thru on the way and arrived in Winchester almost a day earlier than we told Spider we could get there, which had been Erica's plan all along. Remember, Erica wanted to tell them it would only take a couple days. Okay, right now we're listening to this. You never meet the enemy on their terms, she explained as we sped into town. You merely agree to their terms and then catch them off guard. So she made sure that they arrived how many days before?
1 day.
1 day before. That way at 1, perfect. That way 1, Spider doesn't know about it, right? And 2, it gives you some time to prepare. Exactly what I'd have done in this situation, Cyrus said with a chuckle. Where were you supposed to make the exchange? An old barn just north of the city at the intersection of highways 37 and 522, Erica replied. But that's not actually where they're holding the hostages. How do you know that, I asked. Because I scoped the place out last night, Erica told me. I thought you were doing recon on Apple Valley last night, I said. I was, Erica said. And then I came here and did some recon too. That's why I was gone so long. No better way to catch your enemy with their pants down than to show up before they're expecting you. Cyrus chuckled again. Nicely done, Buttercup. So what'd you find out? What does Cyrus think about Erica? She's perfect, right? Everything she does is correct. What does he think about Alexander?
He is a worthless piece of crap.
He's a dum-dum, right? Spider was already at the barn, Erica said, preparing a trap for us, I suspect.
There's no hostages.
I followed some of their guys back to a different farm on the western side of the city. I think the other kids are being held in the main house there. Spider had an awful lot of security set up around it, but I didn't have time to fully investigate. Well, let's do it now, Cyrus said. Where to, Erica? Erica gave him the address of the new location, which was on the outskirts of town. I had expected to find a rustic, peaceful setting, but as we got closer, we found mayhem instead. The roads were filled with bumper-to-bumper traffic. In every field we passed, hundreds of people were gathered. Half were dressed in standard tourist garb, t-shirts, shorts, and baseball caps, with cameras strung around their necks, while the others were dressed far more unusually. Baseball caps, like hats that you put on that have the brim on them. Regular hats, we just call them baseball caps. Make sure you guys are paying attention. They appeared to be in the wrong century. The woman wore hoop skirts and carried parasols, while most of the men were in military uniforms, either blue or gray. What on earth is this? Alexander asked. It's a Civil War reenactment, I groaned. The Battle of Second Winchester, to be specific, Erica said. It was one of the major battles of the Civil War. The celebrations start today and go all weekend. Very clever of Spider, Cyrus said, not bothering to hide his admiration. Why do you say that, I asked. Look around you, Cyrus said. Total chaos. 1,000 distractions for Spider to take advantage of. 100 crowds for them to blend into. But then it's easier for us to blend in too, Erica said. Cyrus grinned at his granddaughter. Yes, he said. I suppose it is. That's how far you got? And now we're on, now this is all new material. Here we go. He pulled into a field that had been turned into a temporary parking lot. A teenage boy in a commemorative "The South Will Rise Again" t-shirt stopped us. "It's $10 to park," he said. "Are you all Yankees, Confederates, or impartial observers?" "Yankees, of course," Cyrus said, and forked over the money. "Is there a settler nearby?" "North end of the field," the kid replied. "They'll fix you up real good." We parked and emerged into a surreal combination of modern and Civil War times. Men in the authentic Civil War uniforms were waiting in line for the state-of-the-art portable toilets. A pickup truck rumbled past, towing an actual cannon on a trailer. Out in the field, soldiers were drilling the same way they would have in 1862, but they were surrounded by hordes of tourists eating takeout fast food and snapping photos with their smartphones. A regiment of cavalry practiced maneuvers in front of a brand new suburban community, while a field hospital filled with men pretending that they'd been hurt in battle might have looked genuine if there hadn't been a Dairy Queen behind it. So, while they're doing a Civil War reenactment, which none of us have ever seen, student-wise, you're going to still see what's actually happening now because you can't reenact, you can't change the whole city, right? You're not going to remove the buildings to have...
There's a Dairyland behind the building.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. It's like a Dairy Queen, right? It's like an ice cream shop. So that's right behind it. But people go and observe these reenactments because they want to see what it used to look like during 1862 during this battle. "Where's the farmhouse in question?" Cyrus asked. Erica pointed across the battlefield. On the far side, beyond a line of cannon, there was a 2-story farmhouse straight out of a storybook. It had a white picket fence, a wraparound porch, and a large tree with a swing hanging from the branches. "Looks like that's behind the Union line," Cyrus said. "We'd better dress accordingly." So what's Cyrus's plan to get closer to it? To dress up like what?
A clown.
What's that? One of the actors from the Civil War reenactment, right? He can get closer because he's right next to him. As promised, there was a settler at the north end of the field. A settler turned out to be a Civil War merchant, or at least a merchant pretending to be from the Civil War. What's a merchant? Anyone know what a merchant is?
No.
They sell stuff. It's like a store owner. Okay? An entire store had been erected under a large tent beneath which you could acquire everything necessary to make yourself look like an authentic soldier. Uniforms, hats, muskets, knives, boots, haversacks, canteens, spyglasses, tinware, and even hardtack specifically made to taste exactly as terrible as it would have been in the Civil War. A man in period merchant dress looked up from polishing a musket as we entered. He had a beard so bushy it looked as though he'd glued the tail of a squirrel to his chin. "Greetings, good citizens," he said. "Can I be of some service today?" "I hope so," Cyrus replied. "We're longtime reenactors, but unfortunately, our house burned down this year and we lost all of our gear. We're in need of 4 full union uniforms, from caps to boots, and we understand this is the place to come for the highest quality merchandise." What is he trying to get this guy to give him?
The gear.
The gear, the uniform. Excellent.
Free.
A big smile blossomed beneath the merchant's mustache. "That is it, good sir. I can get you all outfitted in a jiffy, although," he nodded toward Erica, "I can't help to notice that one of you isn't qualified for service in this man's army." Who is he looking at? Because during this time, women were not in the army fighting like that. Erica's eyes narrowed. "You ever heard of Sarah Emma Edmonds? She disguised herself as a man and not only fought valiantly in the war, but also served as a spy for the Union." "Of course I've heard of her," the merchant said. "Well, I happen to be her great-great-great-granddaughter," Erica told him. "And as such, I believe that gives me the right to fight as a man in whatever battle I choose." The merchant turned bright red. "I'm terribly sorry to offend you, ma'am," he said. "I had no idea you were the descendant of such an important figure. I'll get you outfitted right away." He scurried off to grab some clothes for us. I turned to Erica, surprised. Are you really Sarah Edmonds' descendant? No, she said. I only know her from history of ancient American espionage, although I did have quite a few ancestors who were spies for the Union. Of course you did, I said. A half hour later, Cyrus handed over a wad of cash that had been stashed in his utility belt, and we left the settlers dressed from head to toe in authentic Civil War gear. Does he get the gear for free?
Yes.
No. Hands over the cash from his utility belt. I quickly discovered that in the world of Civil War battle reenacting, authentic means incredibly uncomfortable. My uniform was poorly made, itchy, and ill-fitting, which means it did not fit well. It was also dirty, smelly, full of holes, and nasty hot. Despite the summer sun beating down, I was wearing 3 layers: the long johns, the regular uniform, and a heavy top coat. I was also weighed down with a musket, a bayonet, a bandolier of ammunition, and a haversack stuffed with my old clothes and a few new supplies. Before I'd gotten halfway across the battlefield, I was dripping with sweat. Did we have to be completely authentic, I asked Erica. I'm going to die of dehydration. You don't want to look like a farb out here, Erica told me. You'll draw attention to yourself, and we don't need attention. So they have to dress officially like them?
Yeah.
Yes, you had to make sure that no one's going to find out who you are. I nodded inside. A farb. I'd learned from the Sudler was a reenactor who didn't strive for authenticity. For example, someone who had a good sense to wear nice, comfortable cotton underwear beneath his uniform. In this spirit, Erica had hidden any trace of the fact that she was a woman, just as Sarah Edmonds had probably done. Her hair was tucked up under her blue cap, and she wore the same clothes that I did. I had originally worried that we'd stand out given our ages, but it turned out that there were plenty of kids dressed for battle. Apparently, it was common for children to participate in the Civil War, and thus lots of fathers had brought their sons along for a fun family weekend of simulated violence and bloodshed. Are there a lot of kids dressed up here?
Yeah.
As opposed to Erica's family, who were bringing her along for a weekend of actual violence and bloodshed. We reached the Union Brigade closest to the farmhouse where we suspected Spider was holed up. A soldier on point pointed his musket at us. State your business, he demanded. Cyrus gave him a sharp salute. Cyrus Hale and family looking to join your forces so that we may aid in ridding the Union of the Confederate scourge. The Union soldier relaxed his guard and smiled. The 34th Regiment under the Honorable General Robert Milroy appreciates your help. We took a terrible beating in this morning's battle, and we could use some extra hands. He pointed towards the battlefield where dozens of men still lay in the summer sun, pretending to be dead or wounded, waiting for nurses, medics, and coroners to come collect them. Where might we be of best service? Cyrus asked. Well, we always need basic infantry, the soldier said. Though I don't suppose any of you knows how to work a cannon? One of our usual cannoneers came down with dropsy this morning. Dropsy, I asked. Really? Well, no, the soldier confided. In truth, he got a bad case of irritable bowel syndrome, but dropsy sounds more authentic. So what's he need someone to do if they want to be part of it? Fire the cannon. They got to be in charge. I know how to work a cannon, he said with a smile. Who knows how to work a cannon? What's your guess?
My dad.
You think Cyrus? Cyrus said it. You do? The soldier asked excitedly. You do? Alexander echoed. Of course, Cyrus told them. My grandfather taught me. The soldier quickly brought us over to the cannons, where the news that Cyrus knew how to fire one was met with great excitement. After a brief quiz to establish that Cyrus truly knew what he was doing, the 4 of us were placed in charge of an actual working cannon. Cyrus was to serve as head cannoneer, while the rest of us were in charge of loading and firing it. There was no real ammunition. Even the reenactors weren't that committed to authenticity. But there were gunpowder charges so that the cannons would boom and smoke just like the real things, along with cork cannonballs that could be fired at the enemy. Why aren't we using real cannons?
You kill somebody?
You kill someone, right? Yeah, we know that. It's
That's
a
what you
reenactment.
want. Like,
Not a reenactment. It's like playing war. That's all they're doing. Our cannon was one of 10, arrayed along the western edge of the battlefield, aimed toward the Confederate forces of the east. The farmhouse Spider had commandeered was behind our lines, farther west of us, but the Union brigade we'd fallen in with was a large one, and we were able to case the enemy compound without much fear of being noticed. We used our brand new Civil War scopes, which actually worked quite well. They didn't have the laser-guided digital focusing of the scopes we used in spy school, but I could still see everything in the distance quite clearly. The battlefield sloped gently so that we were slightly uphill from the farmhouse. Thus, I could look straight through the second-story windows into what appeared to be the master bedroom. So are they actually reenacting the battle, or what are they looking at right now? The farmhouse. They're looking at the farmhouse of Spider. They're taking their scopes from their guns and looking into the house to see if they can spot hostages or anything. There was a gauzy window shade, but it was flapping in the breeze, and as it did, I caught sight of a person sitting in a chair in the telltale ramrod position of someone whose wrists are being tied behind their back. There was a blindfold wrapped around her eyes. "I found Zoe," I said. "Where?" all the Hales asked at once. "Second floor, southernmost room," I replied, and they all swung their scopes that way. "Looks like they got... Oh! Chips there too," Erica reported. "And Jawa." "Looks like they got the whole gang," Alexander said. "I count 6 hostages." I did too. Claire, Hank, and Warren were also in the room, tied to chairs and blindfolded. They weren't alone. "There's guards in the room with them," I reported. 2 men, both armed. "So what's in the house? What do we got? We got all 6 what?"
and 2 men, and then the guard.
2 armed ones. Excellent. Which means there's probably a dozen more we can't see, Cyrus said. "I'm going to go a bit closer, do some more invasive recon." "All right," Erica exclaimed excitedly, but Cyrus held up a hand, signaling her to stay put. "I said I'm going to go," he told her. "You've stuck your head out plenty already today, little lady." "Oh, Grandpa," Erica began to protest. "No," Cyrus said firmly. "First of all, it's dangerous. Second, we need to keep a low profile here. An old coot wandering around the battlefield in uniform won't attract much attention here today. An old coot wandering around with his granddaughter will." "I'll be careful," Erica said. "They won't see us." "They will," Cyrus told her. "These guys aren't amateurs, so just park your keister right here until I get back."
Keister? What's a keister?
That's her bot. She's got to sit right there. Cyrus shifted his attention to Alexander. Alexander whined. "You mean I'm not going out either?" "No. We can't afford any screw-ups right now," Cyrus told him. "And no one screws up like you do." Alexander recoiled as though his father had slapped him. Cyrus took no notice of his son's hurt feelings. He handed Erica his haversack. "There's 2 walkie-talkies in there. I've got the 3rd," he said, then slipped into the crowd of Union soldiers and disappeared. Where's Cyrus going?
He's going to see if there's any more guards that he...
And he's going to go and get closer. Some recon, right? Erica opened the rucksack and took out the walkie-talkies, amused by how out of date they were. "Radio communication?" she said with a smile. "I'm surprised he didn't just give us a tin can on a string." Alexander slumped against the cannon, looking miserable. I actually found myself feeling sorry for him. Yes, Alexander was a cad, a phony, and an opportunist. But I got the sense that he'd spent a great deal of his life trying to impress his father and had never received so much as a smile in return. Meanwhile, Erica seemed to be at the opposite end of the emotional spectrum. While a few hours with Cyrus had beaten Alexander down, Erica was as chipper as I'd ever seen her. She had resumed her surveillance of the enemy compound, whistling happily as she peered through her scope. "You don't seem that upset that he left you here," I said. Erica shrugged. "I'm not thrilled about it, but Grandpa's right about needing to keep a low profile. He's always right when it comes to these things. He was probably the best spy the CIA ever had." Ever had, I repeated. He looks like he's still working to me. Erica shook her head. No, he's been retired for years. He still consults every once in a while, but he's never agreed to be activated again until now. Really, I asked? Because he certainly seems to enjoy it. Oh, I know he does, Erica said. But he says that spying is a young man's game. He looks fine to me, I said. He held his own against those guys at Apple Valley today, Erica smiled. He didn't mean physically. He meant that the longer you stay in, the more enemies you make. And Grandpa racked up plenty of enemies over the years. Plus, you can only keep your identity a secret for so long. Eventually, it becomes too dangerous for you to stay active. In fact, it's even dangerous to be inactive. Grandpa had to go underground years ago. I don't even know where he lives. Do they know where Grandpa lives? No, not at all. I turned to her stunned.
Oh,
But-
these are questions that will be on Kahoot.
There'll be a mix of them, possibly.
I thought I was going to make them.
But you're his granddaughter? When you've had a career like this, Erica said, there's no such thing as being too careful. I realized that. While I'd spent an awful lot of time thinking about life as a spy, I'd never spent any time thinking about life after being a spy before. It suddenly seemed awfully sad and lonely. My mind flitted back to the first conversation I'd had with Murray Hill when he tried to recruit me to Spider, where he'd emphasized all the negative aspects of a life in espionage. I have something for you to do later. Now there was another one. How often do you get to see him? I asked. Oh, every month or so, Erica said. He drops in when he's sure the coast is clear. Of course, I suspect he keeps tabs on me the rest of the time, though I've never caught him at it. Of course he keeps tabs on you, Alexander said sullenly. You're his pride and joy. The perfect student that I never was. Erica turned to her father. That's not true, she said. Yes, it is, Alexander grumbled. Nothing I did was ever good enough for him. I couldn't disarm an enemy in 2 seconds. I couldn't build a bomb out of household chemicals without blowing up the kitchen. Even now, I can't be expected to help on a simple surveillance run. You heard him. I'll just screw things up. He turned away and sat down on a sack of gunpowder. Erica sighed sadly. Despite all the bad things she told me about her father, she seemed to feel sorry for him too. The ensuing silence was pretty uncomfortable. I tried to distract myself by scoping out the farmhouse again. Not much had changed, though. My classmates were in the same places they'd been the first time I checked, which made sense since they were tied to the furniture. The same 2 men were still on guard in the bedroom. The only difference was that I could now see a third guard. He was downstairs in what appeared to be the kitchen, looking out the window furtively. I wondered where Cyrus was. I scanned the crowd of Union soldiers but couldn't find him. As I searched, something began to nag at me. I had a sense that something we just discussed was important, although I wasn't quite sure why. I felt like I was looking at a hazy picture that had barely begun to come into focus. I lowered my scope and turned back to Erica. Has the CIA tried to reactivate your grandfather before? Oh, sure, she said. He says they come to him all the time. So why did he agree this time? For a chance to actually confront Spider, Alexander said. Defeating them would probably cement his reputation as the greatest spy of all time. As Alexander said this, however, I knew it was the wrong answer. I locked eyes with Erica. She realized it too. No, she said, growing concerned. He reactivated because of me. I think so, I agreed. Like your father said, you're Cyrus's pride and joy. He knew you'd gotten involved in this and was worried about you. The hazy picture was becoming clearer now. Why did Cyrus come back to the CIA? For Erica. A bugle blared from the Confederate lines on the far side of the battlefield. A war whoop rose from the rebels, followed by an excited cheer from the spectators. To arms! Yelled the bearded man on horseback. He wore a general's uniform and waved a saber above his head. Johnny Rep prepares to attack. Let us make these fields run red with his blood. Now the Union soldiers whooped. The men around us leaped to their feet and shook their weapons in the air. After milling about in the hot sun for a few hours, everyone was excited to play war. Erica, Alexander, and I were the only ones focused on the other direction. We were all staring at the farmhouse. So do they look pretty strange right now? Yeah. Imagine all of you guys are running that way for the war, and you look back and you see three of us staring the opposite direction at a farmhouse. Probably gonna look like a distraction of some sort. Yeah, very good. Eric asked her father, "Did Grandpa know I was involved in this when the CIA approached him about activating?" Alexander frowned. I'm sure he did. I looked to Erica worried. Everything was beginning to make sense. Like why Spider had been so blatant in their intentions with me. "This isn't about me at all," I said. "Spider never wanted me." "They wanted Grandpa," Erica said. "They knew you'd come to me for help, and if Dad got involved, then he'd get involved." "No," Alexander said. "They couldn't be that far ahead of us." "They're always that far ahead of us," I said. I suddenly felt hollow inside. In part, this was because, once again, Spider had completely fooled everyone, including me. Does Spider want Ben?
No.
Does Spider want Erica?
No.
Alexander?
No.
Who does Spider want?
Grandpa.
Cyrus Hale. But in part, I was also ashamed. There hadn't been anything special about me. I had no invincible innate skill that made me invaluable to Spider's plans. Spider had made it all up to mislead everyone involved. I was a patsy and a fool. All around us, the Union soldiers were rushing to form tight ranks in front of the cannons. One of the walkie-talkies in Erica's hand suddenly quacked to life. "There's fewer agents on hand than I expected," Cyrus reported. "This battle's distracting them. I'm going for the hostages." "No, Grandpa!" Erica shouted into the radio. "Don't do it!" "I have to," Cyrus told her. "We're not going to get another chance like this. I'll be in and out before they even know I hit them." Going to radio silence. "Wait!" Erica yelled. "They know you're coming. They've wanted you all along." But there's no answer in return. "He's turned off his radio," Erica said. I had seen her in danger many times before, but until that moment I had never seen her look scared. "I'm going after him." "Me too," Alexander said. He appeared both determined to prove his worth to his father and absolutely terrified to face the enemy. "Count me in," I said, desperate to prove my worth as well. "No," Erica told me. "You're still only a first year, and these men are dangerous."
Okay.
She handed me a walkie-talkie. "Stay here. Be our eyes on the farmhouse. I'll be in touch." Before I could protest, she was running off the battlefield, fighting her way through the surging Union forces. Alexander was on her heels. "Hey!" the lead cannoneer shouted at them. "Don't desert your posts! The battle's about to begin!" Erica and Alexander didn't even look back. They vanished into a sea of blue uniforms, leaving me alone on the battlefield.